Can the Wise Mothman be cEDH viable? This is a question that's been plaguing me for months, and I've landed on an answer. Yes. The Wise Mothman from the Fallout precons is a 4-mana Sultai mutant insect. This 3/3 flyer reads, whenever the Wise Mothman enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. Rad counters are these bad boys. They're counters that players get, like experience or energy or poison counters, and at the beginning of an irradiated player's pre-combat main phase, they mill cards equal to the number of rad counters they have, then take 1 damage and lose 1 rad counter for each non-land card they've milled. If you milled a land, no damage, but the rad counters stick around. Now, there are a few good reasons the Mothman is cEDH viable, but first and foremost, because of rad counters, the Mothman is a food chain commander. Food Chain is an enchantment that reads, exile a creature you control. Add X mana of any one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. This is very interesting, because a creature makes more mana than it takes to cast them, making this a mana-positive exchange. You may be familiar with other Food Chain commanders like Prosh, the First Sliver, or Atraxa, and those decks win by using Food Chain to make infinite mana to cast their commanders from the command zone over and over and over again. Food Chain makes infinite mana with creatures that can cast themselves from exile. Squee the Immortal, Eternal Scourge, and Misthollow Griffin are the keys here. They exile themselves for 1 more mana than it takes to cast them, meaning they pay for themselves and net you 1 mana. In our case, we can't use Squee, but the others help us make infinite mana in this deck. Now, I've seen some confusion as to what infinite means, and as long as we can recast our cast from exile creatures again and again, the first thing we do is make infinite mana of the color needed to cast that creature. And infinite means, well, unimaginable numbers. Enough that we can use some of it and still have as much as we will ever need to do other things. We then use a small reserve of the mana of that color to make infinite mana of the next color we need to cast the Mothman until we have more than we'll ever conceivably need. Then we create infinite mana of the 3rd color. Now we have infinite mana of all 3 of our colors. Infinite means we will never, ever run out of mana to cast creatures. Ever. Then, once we've created infinite mana in all of our colors, we cast the Mothman and start exiling him to Food Chain, solely for the purpose of recasting him from the command zone over and over. Sure, he costs 2 more each loop, but we have infinite mana. Like more mana than stars in the sky, more sand than in the ocean, more people than on Earth. And when Mothman enters the battlefield, each player gets a rad counter, giving each player, ourselves included, infinite rad counters. Since rad counters trigger at the beginning of the pre-combat main phase, all we need to do is then pass the turn, and each opponent will mill every card in their library and take damage equal to the amount of non-land cards left in their decks, which, in every case, is enough to take out each of your opponents before your rad counters ever matter. Now, Food Chain isn't invincible as a combo. There are a lot of interaction points with it. You could counter the Food Chain, easy enough, but also countering Eternal Scourge or Misthollow Griffin stops the combo in its tracks too, since they can only be cast from exile and not from a graveyard. Squee gets a pass here though, because he can be cast from a graveyard. The Food Chain player just needs the mana to recast it. But interestingly enough, a Teferi's Protection in response to the rad counter triggers can save a player too. Teferi's Protection prevents a life total change, meaning players will still mill their libraries but won't lose life, meaning you'll die to your rad counters before they draw a card from an empty library. With the core of the combo explained, I should also address the elephant in the room. We're in Sultai, so yes, we can run Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation. There's no reason not to, even though a lot of people are sick of this 2-card game-winning combo. It's a fallback plan, and it's a damn good one at that. There is no reason not to include it in a cEDH deck that can include it. Call it boring, call it trite, call it rote. It wins games. But I'm really burying the lead on what makes this deck unique. I said I've been toying with this deck for months, and it's true. Some folks may have seen me play an early prototype of this deck with Alan at Mental Misplay, and the secret sauce in my build is Slime against Humanity. That's right, cEDH slimes, baby! With 25 slimes in the deck, it gives us a couple of strange options. We could eventually go to Pound Town with our gooey guys, or we could use them to thin our deck significantly. Using cards like Lost Legacy or Surgical Extraction, we can instantly chop our decks down by 25%, making it much easier to find our combo pieces even without tutor effects. Deck thinning is usually a contentious topic revolving around fetch lands, where it makes a minuscule difference, but this is taking it to the extreme. It worked well in testing, but without the layered combo finishes, relying just on Slime Against Humanity to battle for the victory. And don't get me wrong, it does that very well. In fact, with 25 slimes in the list, you could exile just 20 of them, turning 5 cards in your deck into 3 mana 20/20 tramplers because Slime Against Humanity counts copies of itself in exile. Which, let me check, yes, just as I thought, is very good even in cEDH. This is likely not a top tier build, as you sacrifice a lot of utility to make room for the deck's gimmick. But when it pops off, it feels very, very good. With the rest of the deck filled out with fast mana, Black's tutors, and Blue's counter magic, this list has a real chance to be disruptive or protect its own combo. With cards like Sylvan Library, Mystic Remora, and Rhystic Study, you've got more than enough ways to, starting very early, begin digging through your deck for pieces of the many layered combos. And with utility creatures like Opposition Agent to steal the occasional tutor, Gilded Drake to disrupt an opponent's commander-focused plan by stealing it all for yourself, and Destiny Spinner successfully protecting all of the pieces of your food chain combo, the deck has everything you need to make something strong, fun, and, let's be honest, pretty silly in a competitive format. The mana curve is sitting at 1.5, and that's because a quarter of your deck is Slime Against Humanities, but that means 30 lands in the list is perfectly sufficient as well. You'll be left with quite a few once you thin it out, but thankfully that leaves you with more than enough ability to cast Mothman the way that he was intended, to punch opponents. What do you think? Does this work? How do you think it measures up to other food chain commanders? And is the Slime Against Humanity angle too cute? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to check out the full list linked in the description at my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is the best deck building platform in the world and makes it easy to add cEDH packages to your list so you can use the strongest cards in the strongest format. While you're there, be sure to follow my profile. And while you're here, check out these other videos, including my game over on Alan's channel. If you are inspired to brew, you have to hit that subscribe button. And as always, folks, good luck and have fun.